Right, we're now going to move on to tables. In its simplest form, tables in HTML documents place information inside cells formed by dividing a rectangular object into rows and columns. And you are probably fairly familiar with tables from within applications like Word or Excel. The way to start an HTML table is to use the table tag. And we need to always open and close that table tag. We then need to specify each row that we are going to include in that table. So to specify a row, we use tr, and again to close that row we use the /tr. We can then specify within each row either a heading or data cell. So this first row, perhaps we're going to include some headings. So to include the first heading, we'd use th, and we'd open it, and let's call that heading 1. And then we're also going to include a second heading cell. Therefore, at the moment we have a table with one row and 2 heading cells in it. Let's have a look at what that's going to look like within our document. There we go. Okay, so here's our table. At the moment we can't really see the outline of our table. I'm going to turn on the border property. And to do that we just add the attribute border, and we then specify how big the border is going to be in pixels. So 1's going to be fine. And now if you refresh that, yep, we can now see the outline of the table. We're now going to add some other rows to our table. So we start a new row, and again let's close it at the end, and then within those row tags, instead of heading cells, we're going to include data cells. So we're going to use TD this time. And again, for each cell that we want there to be, we open and close using the relevant tag. Okay, and then let's finally do a third row. Okay, so let's just recap on that. We've got a table here, and we open and close the table using the table element. For every row we need to use the tr element, and then within each row we also have to specify each cell, and that cell can either be a heading cell or it can be a data cell. And for heading cells we use the th element, and for data cells we use the td element. Let's just preview that in a browser. There we go. So the heading cells by default have a bold typeface, and the normal data ones will have the same typeface as the rest of the body of the document. We can also control how the table is going to look. We've seen how we can change, for example, the border attribute of the table to allow us to see the border. Other things that we can add to the table element as attributes are things like the width. So let's specify that we're going to have it as 400 pixels wide. Perhaps we're also going to align it in a center location. For those of us from the UK, we need to be a little bit careful with the spelling of certain attribute keywords. For example, center. Center is spelt using the American spelling, and if we use the UK spelling, then it wouldn't work. So we can change the alignment of the table. We could also perhaps change the background color if we wanted to. So Let's just change a bit background color, and let's make it light blue. There we go. Having implemented all those attributes, our table is now in a center position. It's got a background color of blue, and its width is 400 pixels wide. I'm just going to change the background color back to white, so I'll actually remove that just so it makes it easier to be able to see our table. And having done that, you'll now notice that when I refresh it, there we go, we're back to normal. Now that we've made the table slightly wider, you can now see that by default the headings are centered in their cell, whereas the other data cells are left aligned. Two other things I just want to show you about are cell padding and cell spacing. Cell spacing is the area between each of the cells, so this kind of area, and cell padding is the area between the contents of the cell, so the text in this case, and the border. We can specify these using the attributes again, cell spacing. So let's change that to say 20, just so that we can see the effect that it has. There we go. And you can now see that it's this space here between the border of two cells, and we've increased that now to 20 pixels wide. We can also add this cell padding attribute, and we'll make that 20 as well, just so we can see the effect. And there we go. And the cell spacing is this area here between the edge of the contents and the border of the cell. So there's now 20 pixel border around the contents as well. I'm just going to remove that cell spacing and cell padding, just so it makes it slightly easier to be able to view our table. Right, let's add a few more cells to our table. I'm going to make it into a 3x3 table. There we go, so we've now got a 3x3 table. And let's just see what that looks like. There we go. I'm just going to show you the effect now of changing the width of the columns. At the moment we specified the width of the table, and that's 400 pixels, and therefore each column will have equal width. Perhaps we want one column to be wider than the rest. Perhaps, for example, we want this first column to have a width of 200 pixels. So what we do is we specify in the first cell in that column the width, and the rest of the column will then follow suit. There we go. So we've now specified that the width of this first column is going to be 200 pixels. The remaining 200 pixels will be split between the second column and the third column, so i.e. each of those will be 100 pixels wide. Because we haven't actually specified the width of column 2 and column 3, the browser automatically sizes things for us. For example, if we start adding extra text into cell 2, here we go, so let's add some extra text in there. Let's see what happens. And what you'll see is that this column here has now grown in size, and heading 3 column has shrunken slightly. And this is because the browser has resized the heading 2 column so that the contents of cell 2 can still be on one line. However, there is a limitation to this. Obviously, if we start adding more and more text, then it can't resize the table so that everything is on one line, and it now goes on to 2 lines. Just going to remove that extra text now. And we're going to have a look at how we can merge cells together. The cells that I'm going to merge together are going to be cell 2 and cell 3. The way that I do it is to use an attribute called colspan. And you apply it to the first cell that it affects. So the first cell that this spanning or merging will affect is going to be cell 2. So we use colspan, and we then just need to tell it how many columns that cell is going to span, and it's going to be 2 columns. We therefore don't need this third cell anymore, because the contents of it is going to be merged with the second cell here. So we'll just save that and see the effect that has. And there we go. So cell 3 has now disappeared, and cell 2 now spans 2 columns. We can do exactly the same thing with a row, and we can span 2 rows. So we'll do a similar thing, but we'll span cell 1, or merge cell 1 and cell 4 together. So cell 1 is the first cell that it affects. The attribute that we use this time is called rowspan, instead of the colspan that we used previously. And we set it to 2 because we're going to be spanning 2 rows. We also don't need cell 4 anymore, so we can get rid of that. There we go. Cell 1 and 4 have merged together, and cell 2 and 3 have now been merged together. And so you can make quite complicated tables by merging different cells together.